So we're going to go ahead and get started on replacing our factory air strut with a BC Coilover on the right rear of our 2004 XJR Jaguar. So first steps first, we're going to break the lug nuts loose and then jack up the car. So now we're going to go ahead and place our jack stand underneath the rear subframe. Right about there. So now we can go ahead and lower our jack. So now we can go ahead and remove the rest of our lug nuts. So after we move into the trunk of our vehicle to disconnect the mounting nuts, airline, and electrical connection on top of the air strut inside the trunk of the vehicle, we have to remove the floorboard of the trunk floor. And in order to do that, there's these safety hooks that go right there, and they have a T30 Torx bolt that goes in the middle of them. Just loosen those up, and these pop out. There's two, so you get one over there, and then that whole thing just comes out. So generally there's a little screw that sits right here, but we're missing ours on this car. So all we have to do is bend this out of place, and it pulls just right on out. You can see right here is where that screw is supposed to be. So right here where this piece of foam is, just grab it, pick it up, and now you are exposed to your four mounting nuts, your electrical connector, and your airline connection. In order to remove the electrical connector, there are two tabs that you just have to pinch, and then it just pulls straight out just like so. And now we should be able to get a 10mm wrench that appears on the air connection. Should just be able to loosen it just like so. Now, since our car has been sitting for a while, there's not much air in the system, so we're not gonna hear or see as much air come out of this. But if you just shut your vehicle off and you just get started on swapping suspension components, there's a good chance there's a lot of air in the system. I'd recommend cracking them and letting them leak down. So now we're going to go ahead and get our 13mm socket and remove the four nuts. Now we can move to the bottom side. So in order for us to remove the strut, we have to disconnect our sway bar end link right here at the sway bar. Be very careful. If you only have one side of your vehicle jacked up, the sway bar is under a lot of tension. So you definitely don't want to keep your fingers in the way of the sway bar once this nut comes off. And then after we do that, we just have to remove our lower bolt on the air strut. And there's our lower bolt right here, which is a 21mm. And then our sway bar end link, since these are new, is a 17mm. So what I got here is a 7mm socket on a 3/8 ratchet. And I'm just going to stick this on the tip right here. But before that, I have a 17mm ratcheting wrench that I'm going to use. And then I use the wrench to loosen the nut and use the ratchet to hold the stud, so that way it doesn't spin. Alright, so now that we got our sway bar end link removed, we're disconnected from the sway bar. We can go ahead and take our 21mm socket, our 1/2-inch breaker bar, and remove this bolt. And just to make quick work out of this bolt, I'm just going to use a little electric impact and impact the bolt. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my pry bar and I'm going to push against the washer while loosening. Here's your big old bolt. And make sure you don't lose this washer because this washer comes off. Alright, so what we're going to do next is we're going to pry right there. Let that drop down. And the next step, we're going to pry on our hub assembly and pry it downwards to give clearance for the air strut to come out. Alright, so now we can go ahead and pry. You can see how much droop we get. So then once we do that, we can work out our air strut. So you just have to kind of finagle this thing out of here. Just work it. And there you go, you got your factory air strut out. Now we can go ahead and get our BC coilover and adjust it to match the other side and go ahead and install it. So here we have our BC coilover for our Jaguar. Included is some BC Racing adjustment tools, so you can adjust the stiffness of the spring and also your ride height. So since we've already adjusted the other side and we know where we want to be, we're going to go ahead and loosen up this lock nut and adjust it to the correct measurement. So you take the smaller tool and you want to hook this into here, into the splines, just like that, and then use the bigger one to counter hold this upper one that's closest to the spring. And just like that, our lock nut is loose. Now we can go ahead and adjust this bottom portion to adjust it to get the correct ride height. So our distance right here on the teeth is almost about 2 inches. We need to be at 3.5. So we're going to go ahead and loosen this guy. So right about there is the 3.5-inch mark. So now we can go ahead and spin our lock nut up to our bottom mount. And we're just going to kind of grip it and tighten it by hand. And then once we get it in the car, there'll be a bolt through this top part so that it'll prevent this guy from spinning so we can properly lock down our lock nut. One of the other things that we're going to have to pay attention to with these rear struts, same thing for the fronts, is that the distance between our studs is different. From this distance, it's longer than if, say, I turn it a little bit, and then this is a shorter distance. Same thing as the factory strut. So what we're going to do is, if you remember correctly, our airline is roughly pointed, kind of angled into the car, like so. So we're going to make sure that our studs line up with the bottom of the strut and where it mounts. So it looks like we're pretty close. So we're going to stick with that orientation of how everything's clocked. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and reinstall our coilover.
So now, while someone's holding the coilover in position underneath the vehicle, we'll go ahead and we'll just thread these nuts in so that we can hold this all in place.
So I have the pry bar above the control arm so I can flex the suspension and I can pull it down to stick the bottom bolt in for the coilover. So I got the pry bar in up here. I'm going to pull down as far as I can. I might have to readjust it a couple different ways to get the most amount of pull. So we're going to go ahead and tap the bolt in. Now we can go ahead and thread it in a little bit. So now we can go ahead and get our breaker bar and tighten it up. Alright, so now we can go ahead and reconnect our sway bar end link and tighten up our nuts on the top of the coilover.